Gareth Southgate has resigned as England manager, and here is his part of a statement that he made on actually stepping down from the role. He said, "As a proud Englishman, it has been the honour of my life to play for England and to manage England. It has meant everything to me, and I have given it my all. But it's time for change and for a new chapter." Ian Darke's still with us. We now have James Olley joining us as well, who's been covering this story for us. Has this come of a surprise in any way, James, that it's Gareth Southgate stepping down, or is this a mutual decision and that's what's being said?
No, it's not a mutual decision. The FA wanted him to carry on to 2026. They'd made that clear privately before the final against Spain on Sunday. There's obviously been growing sort of fan discontent towards Gareth Southgate during the tournament. A lot of criticism of him on social media and from certain pundits as well, podcasts from former England captains. And I think the whole kind of package has just created a situation where Southgate just feels he can't really continue in the role anymore. And maybe I think as well, he probably feels he's had a bit of enough of it now. 4 tournaments, had a very consistent period running deep in those tournaments. But the FA wanted him to continue. They'd made it clear. He had a contract through to December, I think, for a specific reason. That's quite unusual. Normally, the contracts run to sort of the end of July. Straight after a tournament cycle. But I think they gave him to December because they wanted to try and give him a chance to get any negativity out of his system. He nearly left, of course, after the last World Cup in Qatar, but I think this time the sort of whole situation was too much for him in the end, and he just felt, as he said in his statement, it was time to move on and time for something different.
Right decision from Southgate, Craig?
Oh, right decision for himself, if that's what he feels. To be quite honest with you, I'm a bit betwixt and between. I think there's a lot of people, and some of the stuff in social media is beyond the pale, but that's not a surprise, is it? You can't argue with where he's taken England. You can't. That's factual. It's not up for debate in terms of previous managers, previous teams. But the debate rages on about, did England have the handbrake on a little bit or a lot? Was there more to come? Which I think there was. And I think also you're not putting it all down to luck, because it's not all luck. But there was definitely an element of it in terms of sides of brackets where England finished up on. And this competition wasn't the only one where the pathway was slightly easier. Now, there was 7 games in the competition, and I can remember 45 minutes where I thought England looked like themselves against Holland, and that wasn't a great Holland side. So there's lots of different angles to it, but I wouldn't sort of take away from what he's achieved, because that's laid bare in front of you. It just, me watching as a non-Englishman, was always kind of thinking there's more to come here. There's a little bit more from this England side, and maybe that's the argument that some would want. Now, when they hire a new manager, whoever that is, maybe we'll get an even better gauge of this squad of players and was there more to come or not. But yeah, if he feels it's the right thing to do, then he can go out with his head held high. And they've been pipped at the post a couple of times, but sometimes you give people a bit more, a lot more, and they still want more. And so it's a very, very difficult situation to be in.
He's read the room. That's what he's done. Can you imagine we'd sat here a couple of years ago and said, England and Southgate are going to get to the final of the Euros, but along the way they're going to be getting booed and he's going to get beer thrown at him. I mean, how do you come back from that? The only way to come back from that is to actually win something. What's the chances? Whether you think he's a great coach or not, he's done a great job for England. 2 finals, a semi and a quarter-finals. That's a fantastic job. Go back 30 years. In fact, go back to 66. So when you start looking at it on paper, this guy's done a fantastic job. But he's read the room, he knows there's nowhere else for him to go, and it's probably the right thing. He's gotten the team to a position where he can't do any more. He's not going to make them any better. Clearly, he had this tournament, we saw it clearly, the 6-7 games that he had, that this team has reached its peak with him. They need some fresh ideas, maybe a fresh way of going about it, And as I said, apart from that, he's read the room, he's got nowhere to go. And so I think he's done the right thing.
Ian?
Are you going to be all right in the host
You're not going
chair?
to cry. Are you getting upset or are you just choking?
I'm not choking up. Ian Darke.
Okay, you have a drink of water. I know that thing happens to me out half the time when I'm commentating, so you have a good sip of water. No, what I think about it is broadly what the guys have said. You've got to take it back to 2016 when he took over. England were in a complete and utter mess. They'd just been knocked out by Iceland. There'd been the newspaper sting that meant Sam Allardyce only lasted for one game. What Gareth Southgate did is he changed the whole culture around the England camp. It used to be cliques all the time, even though there were some great players. They were sitting at separate tables, the Chelsea lot, the Manchester United lot. No wonder they couldn't produce on the pitch. There was war going on with the media. He mended all those fences. He made a culture and created an environment, an ego-free environment, and he was such a decent man in doing it that meant England could succeed. OK, they weren't great at this championships, even if they did make the final. But he gave England a lot of great moments. And I think when they come to write the history of the England football team, history will look very, very kindly on what Gareth Southgate did.
James, where do you think, where does this leave the FA? What direction do you think the Football Association are going to go?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, is it? They would like to appoint an Englishman for a number of reasons. They have invested a lot of stock in St George's Park, the national base, and they see that as being, the pathway not just for players but also for coaches to come through to the elite level. And you've got to remember Gareth Southgate joined the FA as head of elite development in 2011, and he kind of came through the ranks, if you like, at the FA. He was England under 21 manager in 2016, and then he, as Ian said, he succeeded Sam Allardyce later that year. So ideally, they'd like to see someone of that ilk come through who understands English football, understands the heritage, understands the problems and where things have been done well, and can probably pick up the best of what Gareth has done in the last 8 years and try and take it forward. Now, that would lend itself most logically to Lee Carsley, in theory. He's the current England under-21 manager, but he's not really got any senior management experience whatsoever outside of academy level. He had a few interim positions, I think, at Coventry, Bradford, maybe Birmingham as well. But he's not managed at the top level. So that's a huge ask for him to suddenly step up and be dealing with these big names. And then you look at Eddie Howe and Graham Potter, the bigger English names at the head of the market at the moment. And they're not, I wouldn't say either of those are particularly convincing either. I mean, Graham Potter, my understanding was that had Gareth gone earlier, maybe a couple of years ago, I think Graham Potter had his admirers at the FA and he would have been the name that they would have turned to. But of course, he had that very disappointing spell at Chelsea where the scrutiny kind of got to him a little bit. He wasn't really able to impose his style of play. I mean, look, Chelsea obviously is a kind of a basket case of a club at certain times, particularly at that time when the takeover had just taken place. So it's perhaps harsh to judge Potter solely on what he did and not look at the bigger picture there. But still, there's a question to ask about how much that's damaged his reputation. And that leaves Eddie Howe. But, Eddie Howe's done a really good job at Newcastle. He's obviously got them into the Champions League for the first time in 20 years, built a team that plays good football, that's solid and aggressive. But he's got a multi-year contract. My understanding is that I think is through to 2027. So Newcastle aren't going to want to lose him. That's going to mean the FA would have to pay significant compensation if it is that long a contract. And we don't really know whether Eddie Howe even wants it. So if those are the English options, it then leaves the FA with the opportunity of saying, well, OK, do we go overseas? Do we look for a foreign manager? Didn't work particularly well in the past. They've appointed 2 foreign managers in their history, Sven-Göran Eriksson and Fabio Capello. Neither of them were able to deliver the success that the FA craved. But you do look at Pochettino and Thomas Tuchel, who are the 2 probably logical out-of-work managers, and they've got good pedigrees. Pochettino obviously has got a strong relationship with managing in England. He's managed at Tottenham for 5.5 years. He had that season at Chelsea. He loves English football. He stayed in London quite a lot. He had that brief spell at Paris Saint-Germain as well, which obviously winning the French league with Paris Saint-Germain, not necessarily the toughest task in management, but he has done it. He has experience managing those top players. And my understanding is that if the FA wanted to speak to Pochettino, he would be open to it. Also worth mentioning with Pochettino that John McDermott is the technical director at the FA. He worked with Pochettino at Tottenham, and I think their relationship still to this day is very good. And then you look at Tuchel, who of course has the Champions League winning pedigree, also managed in England, speaks fantastic English, wants to be in the Premier League, loves English football. As I remember ESPN doing an interview with Tuchel when he was at Bayern Munich saying, I'm more respected in England than I am in Germany. So I think that would have its appeal, but the FA have got this fundamental conundrum, which is we promote St George's Park, we think fundamentally it should be an Englishman who takes it over, but really the best candidates are actually overseas, foreign-born managers. And what does it say about all the work we do at St George's if we go for a foreign manager as the England coach?
What do you think of those names that we've seen there on that list, guys?
Some good names, but, best manager on the list is Jurgen Klopp, but that's unlikely, very unlikely for various reasons. And I absolutely take James's point there that you sort of, it's a juxtaposition, isn't it, really, for the FA, because they're spending all this money. But sometimes you've got to think, right, we are doing that, but this might not be the right time to bring somebody through from this programme, and it might be time to go outside again and wait. I don't know. It's a very difficult scenario. He was a super safe pair of hands, wasn't he, Gareth Southgate? There's no getting away from that. Both from on the field, which it didn't seem at the time. Let's not forget, when he first took over, he was not going to be this safe pair of hands. It wasn't going to be great at all in most people's eyes. But it turned out it was super safe. In fact, it was better than that. And it was also pretty much squeaky clean off the field, which the FA love as well. So it was a sort of almost a perfect scenario. So I have no idea which way they're going to go. I wouldn't mind somebody like, from an outsider obviously, but I wouldn't mind somebody like Pochettino or Tuchel. I think they're highly experienced, and I think the players would respect them as well. Obviously there'd be a bit of a fan backlash, a little bit, as there usually is, but that would probably be, that would probably come and go. So who knows what direction they're going to go?
If it's an Englishman, Eddie Howe, to me, seems the perfect candidate.
I think so.
We've been sitting talking about Southgate's England, and it's about how they play. Eddie Howe went to Newcastle, to a place that's culture was about getting men behind the ball and surviving. He very quickly changed that mentality into attacking football. If there's one thing England needs right now, with the team they have and the players they have available, it's a change of mentality to step forward and go and win games and not do what Southgate's been criticised for. So if it's to be an Englishman, Eddie Howe's the perfect candidate.
Which is the more attractive proposition for Eddie Howe right now, to continue at Newcastle or to go and take the England job?
I think to go and take the England job, because they, I think they hold him in high esteem at Newcastle,
yeah.
But I think it can change in a whim. I mean, it really can. They had a lot of injuries last year, a lot of problems with the Tonali suspension, and then the injuries kicked in, and it kind of fell apart for them a little bit, or a lot. And I think he had, enough money in the bank, but it's club football, it's the Premier League, it's big business, it's millions and millions and millions of dollars and pounds spent, and that changes. Contracts or not, that changes quickly. And it's a bit like Glenn Hoddle when I was at Chelsea with him. Now, Glenn was just, and it was, by the way, it wasn't the Chelsea that they see today, but it was starting to turn. The stadium was getting renovated around 94, 95, 96. We'd already been to the FA Cup final. We started to sign bigger players like Ruud Gullit and Mark Hughes and others. There was a wee bit more money coming in. He was a young manager, Glenn Hoddle, at the time, with maybe 3 or 4 years' experience. If you take his player manager at Swindon and then his player manager at Chelsea, and the England job came up. Now, in an ideal world, I think Glenn would have probably managed for another 5 or 6 years, but his thought process was, I may never get this chance again. And so he took it. And it didn't go swimmingly for him, but that was the decision that he had to make. And I think if it comes along for one of these managers, like an Eddie Howe or somebody else, they may have that decision, because it's the England manager's job. If you're offered it, do you turn it down and stay at your club? It might and probably will never come around again.
While Stevie continues to think about his answer to this one, what do you make of it all, Ian?
I think Eddie Howe, my hunch is that Eddie Howe would be the #1 target of the Football Association, because I think he's a Southgate-like fit. There's never any big off-field dramas around him. He's managed, I think, in all 4 divisions. I mean, remember the job he did at Bournemouth. They were 91st in the Football League when he took over. He fell in love with coaching, and he's got a habit of making his players really buy into the project at the club that he's at. He's done it at Newcastle United as well. I read a piece this morning about him that said the first thing he did with the players at Newcastle said, I like what you're doing, but do it faster. I want more tempo in the football. So I think he might produce a probably more ambitious, adventurous type of England side. And I think he would get it. He's a man of intelligence. I think he knows what the role would be. I think, the boys have asked the question there. Does he want to do it? Does he want to be on the grass coaching every day with Newcastle United still? Or will he think, look, I'm probably only ever going to get asked once to be the manager of England, and I'll take it. I mean, and they'll have to sort out the money, the compensation. Whether the FA can stretch that, I don't know, but I've got a feeling they'll try.
So give me a quick yes or no, because I want to get to some of the drama in the camp.
He's got the same question about Newcastle and England. He's been waiting for a proper job, a big job, where he's going to have money available in order to be at a different end of the Premier League. So the question is, do I give up what I've been waiting for to take something else that I've been waiting for? But they've both come at pretty much the same time.
So what do you do?
If I'm him, I'm staying at Newcastle.
All right.
Oh.
James, with regards to whoever's taking over England, there seems to be a lot of things to be dealt with in the camp right now. We've seen your latest article on ESPN. We're hearing that it's not all rosy behind the scenes in the England camp.
No, I'd say this was I'd say it was certainly the toughest camp that Gareth had to deal with of his 4 tournaments. And yeah, there were some issues. There were a lot of issues behind the scenes, really. It dates back right before the start of the tournament, really, in terms of the fitness problems that players had. Players were turning up with various injuries, or they just come back from injuries, and there was differing opinions about how fit certain people were. I think that came through most obviously with Harry Kane, who, although they've never admitted it publicly, was clearly carrying a problem through the whole tournament and was never 100%. And really, Southgate was scrambling for ideas. He was improvising during the tournament. This is a guy who's normally so methodical. You think about when England have been at their best under Southgate, they're well coached. You kind of know the team before it's picked. There aren't really any surprises. And actually, we did an interview with him, I think it was in April before the tournament, where he talked a lot to me about patterns of play. And we play 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3. And when these new players come in, when we draft new players into the squad, we want to assimilate them into what we've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. And really, that just got ripped up on the eve of the tournament by playing Trent Alexander-Arnold in midfield. He tried that. It didn't work. He threw in Conor Gallagher. That didn't work. He kind of stumbled into Kobbie Mainoo. Went with that and then decided, actually, do you know what? Let's go to a back 3, changes the system, switching players around, trying to get Luke Shaw involved. Suddenly starts Luke Shaw in the final, goes to a back 4 again in that final against Spain. It was everything that we don't associate with Southgate normally. And I think he was having to juggle there various fitness problems, the issues within the camp. There were 1 or 2 problems, I've been told, with Jude Bellingham. I don't think. I think when you see what he did on the touchline in the final, when he's quite aggressively shouting at Southgate, pretty obviously to change it or to intervene or to do something, he felt it wasn't getting enough from the manager. I think that desire that he's shown, that's been such an important part of the player that he's become, was maybe misinterpreted by some of his teammates and maybe became difficult to handle for Gareth at times. There's differing opinions on that. Some people play that up, others play it down and say Bellingham was a very good and conscious member of the squad. Of course, he was made a part of the leadership group at 20, which was something of a surprise right on the edge of the tournament. When you think about other players like Kieran Trippier, like John Stones, like Jordan Pickford, who'd been around the camp for a very long time, and suddenly they weren't part of that leadership group. So just all of these little dynamics, it's been such a smooth ride behind the scenes for Gareth for 3 tournaments. I think, again, that may have been part part of his thinking in deciding to walk away, that it just felt as though he didn't quite have the control over it and the authority over it, and just the clarity of thought around the tournament that he'd shown and had in the past that had led to those performances that had taken them so close. And I think we've just got to be careful not to throw the baby out of the bathwater in terms of when they change managers here, because I think one of Southgate's most sort of the biggest elements of his legacy is the intangibles. It is the culture. It is the fact that players wanted to play for England. They wanted to be there. He had broken down the barriers with the media and reconnected the team with the fans. And if they were to go for, and we're talking about foreign managers, but sort of Tuchel and Pochettino are almost half English, if you like, in terms of their experience and knowing the game and speaking the language and all those kind of things. But you've just got to be careful. If you're going for that elite, more progressive manager, what this team needs is just to be coached properly, take the handbrake off, and they'll go and win the World Cup. You can't sacrifice the cultural aspect behind the scenes, the desire to be there, the togetherness and the cohesion that they had up until this tournament. And even at this tournament, they still found a way. They were still digging results out. So whatever issues there were, they were still able to come together to get over the line in those matches up until the final. And I think it's just important that they don't lose sight of that, to go for just a glamorous name and think, oh, well, this is just the last piece of the puzzle. Because once you lose that culture and once you lose that desire for players to go and play, it's very, very difficult to get it back.
What stood out to you from what James was saying there about what's going on in the camp with some of the players and like the Jude Bellingham situation?
I don't really know about the Bellingham situation. What I can say is, as you know, we cover La Liga every week here on ESPN, is that we saw glimpses of that for those that watched Real Madrid games towards the end of the season. And it was, maybe it wasn't an arrogance, but it was a frustration at officials in Spain and other outside things. And so we saw a different... In the first 6 months of the season, we saw a Jude Bellingham who was just absolutely flying. And he could do no wrong, and he was the happiest chap on a football field. But that changed. And as it changed towards the end of the season, so did his performances. And I think that continued in to the European Championships. And I saw the frustration in his face very early in the group stages. It might have been the second game when he was chasing players, and I can't remember I know the first game was Serbia, I think the second, I can't remember who the second game was. Denmark. But he was chasing players back into the left back area, making tackles. And he turned around and he was like gesticulating to his teammates to sort of be better and get a hold of the game. And you could see the frustration coming through in Jude Bellingham, because he's came from this Real Madrid dominant, superstar side, and I think he's looked around at his England teammates and thought, we're better than this. And we saw that, we gradually saw that as the competition went on. I didn't see the incident with Southgate in the final, but I certainly saw frustrations in Jude Bellingham, and it wasn't just with England. We did see it, for those that watched the Liga, at the end of the Spanish season. It was creeping in, and his performances coming into this tournament were not the same as his performances in the first 6 months of the La Liga season.
See, there's two ways you can look at that, what Craig said there. There's one way you can look at it and say, he's losing what he's so good at, he's losing because he's frustrated. And it's almost like we're saying, well, you can't get frustrated, you need to toe the line, you need to be calmer. Listen, number one, the guy's, early 20s?
20, yeah.
The guy's a kid, he's a kid. And I will take 11 Jude Bellinghams every single day of the week if they get frustrated when things are not going well and they're looking for some guidance. And absolutely, if somebody on the field doesn't know what to change it, how to go about it, I'm the one guy sitting on the sideline, the coach, because guess what? That's my job. I'm the one guy I want him to be shouting at. I don't want him to be losing his rag with all the other players and upsetting everybody else. I want to have a dialogue with him. And sometimes you have arguments with players. It doesn't mean that you don't like them, or it doesn't mean that you've lost control of them. You're men and you're trying to fix something at that point. Now, we're talking about the final. And he's frustrated because things are not going well. I'll have him every single day of the week, and 10 others.
Ian, you've been nodding along to what Stevie's saying there.
Yeah, I mean, Jude's had a feisty side to him. I think going back, I don't know about Birmingham City, but certainly in his Dortmund days, there were one or two stories reaching us from the Bundesliga that some of the senior players felt he maybe had a little bit too much to say for himself. And I think we're getting the kind of vibes from those who've been around the England camp in Germany that there may be one or two players who thought it might be just becoming a little bit too much like the Jude Bellingham show. But the bottom line is, I think, with him, he is a special talent. He turned 21 during the tournament. And I think he's like that because he really cares and he wants the performances to be at the top level. But unfortunately for him, he wasn't anywhere like his true level at these championships. Same with Phil Foden, same with Harry Kane. You know, yeah, obviously he was carrying an injury. But they've just got to watch it with him. He needs to be managed, but, you know, he's not a straightforward character, clearly.